In the pilot episode of the series, we discussed basic composition and structured a core 4-bar loop. In the last episode, we dived deeper into the importance of sound choice and how to pick your instruments and samples for a modern sounding production. In this episode, we're putting everything together and arranging a track fully up to the end of the first chorus.
Generally, one can divide arrangement into horizontal and vertical. Horizontal arrangement refers to how the track flows from one section to another, how its energy builds, releases and changes overall throughout the song. Vertical arrangement, on the other hand, includes some of the aspects we already discussed and refers to how various sounds can be layered to cover an appropriate range of frequencies in order to achieve the desired sound.
Oh, and stay tuned till the end as we have an exciting and very fun announcement for all of you. Now, let's jump right into the final episode.
Before we start our arrangement, we need to consider how exactly we created our initial idea. Is our loop going to be the chorus? Is it going to be the verse? Or even the pre-chorus? All options are valid and are dependent on how full your core idea is, as well as what general vision for the track you have. In our case, we had the verse in mind when designing our loop.
While not as full as we would like a chorus to be, our core loop still has a fair number of elements. Because of this, we want to take things away when arranging verse A. Then we will build the energy by bringing in the other or even some new elements. For example, we're bringing in this chopped up guitar loop exclusively for the second half of the verse A, as it adds variation and a sense of progression.
Another very common technique is to take away some of the drums. Hats and percussion loops in particular tend to pick up the energy and drive the song forward. Thus, it is important to utilize their impact smartly. In our case, we did not want to give them away from the start.
Of course, there are numerous approaches here. Similarly to the percussive elements, bringing in the bass, the kick, or the two together can have a massive impact and introduce a strong energy shift. You can see this in our track when it progresses from the intro into the verse.
In general, if you look at our verse, you can see something is changing every 4 bars. Here we bring in the guitar, and in verse B we bring in the hi-hats. In the second half of the B verse, however, we do something different.
Indeed, developing an arrangement is more than just removing and adding in loop elements. In fact, only sticking to this method can quickly make your track feel like a string of loops. So what else can we do?
There are many ways to introduce change. We can utilize the elements we already have and filter the synths and pads. We can then remove the filter for the new section. This is a great way of making the most out of your sounds. Keeping the sound the same translates to familiarity for the listener, but the different flavor ensures that they don't get bored.
However, instead of using new or changed elements for the whole duration of the 4 bars, we can also do something else. We generally refer to those as transitions, and they can constitute all sorts of sounds and effects.
Of course, drums also play a vital role here. Drum fills are a great tool which we can use to transition from one section to another.
We can also switch up the rhythm unexpectedly to create contrast and surprise.
The ultimate goal here is to create a sense of unity. When we move from verse 1A into verse 1B, we are not just adding another loop. Instead, all elements play their role to progress, either smoothly or by offering surprise, into the new section.
Take a listen to what happens when we transition from verse A into verse B.
First, the core rhythm changes up to surprise the listener.
The other elements also follow this rhythm, accenting it further.
We added an open hat on each hit to further emphasize it.
And at the same time, our initially filtered synth now open up and have a lot more frequencies.
All of these elements happen in unison, which is exactly the effect we're after.
But we have only spoken about the verse so far. What about our pre-chorus?
The pre-chorus often resets the energy before the chorus. The reason for this is that we can't infinitely add elements in an attempt to achieve a fuller sound. At some point, all our frequencies would simply be covered and elements would start clashing, creating a muddy sound.
Therefore, in order to make our chorus hit and be the ultimate burst of energy in the song, we first need to take energy away and then build it up again. Of course, there are other approaches, as with everything in music, but we will look at those in the future.
Indeed, contrast is a fantastic way to design a pre-chorus. One way to achieve this is to do the opposite of what the verse does rhythmically. For example, if we have a more upbeat and snappy rhythm in the verse, we could opt for a flowy pre-chorus with longer held notes. Additionally, it is quite common to see chord and rhythm changes in this section too.
However, before we discuss our pre-chorus in detail, we first need to transition into it smoothly. Since we introduce quite a significant change from the verse, we are utilizing a drum fill combined with a cymbal crash and some noise downlift or swoosh to smoothen out the transition.
We also cut out the bass, drums and guitar right when the drum fill starts. This serves as the energy reset we spoke about earlier, as it draws the full focus to the fill.
In the pre-chorus itself, instead of continuing with our drum and bass influenced groove, we switch to a Jersey-inspired rhythm, which is fairly trendy in K-pop currently and has a particularly known kick pattern.
Additionally, we changed the chorus here to a descending chord progression.
But that's not all, we also have a melody that follows the rhythm of the kick, beach atmosphere to set the scene, and an additional watery layer on top of the melody to further enhance the concept.
Once again, we need to have a sense of progression here, so we add a drum loop and more percussion in the second half to build into the chorus.
So far, so good. Now let's talk about arguably the most important section, the chorus.
While not always true, a lot of choruses are more developed and more energetic versions of the verse. While the pre-chorus had the purpose to reset the energy, the chorus is the big explosion, so usually we want all the core elements and more to shine fully here.
As you can see, with the exception of the guitar, all our verse elements also appear in the chorus. Additionally, we have a cymbal hit at the start of the chorus to enhance its impact.
However, in order to increase the energy, we now also need to consider vertical arrangement, aka layering. As you can see, we have two additional layers for our chords in the A chorus.
One of these layers is quite high and heavy and thus quite energetic. It also adds rhythm, making the chorus feel familiar but still novel.
The other layer adds texture and airiness.
Combined, they sound like this.
You may wonder now why we chose not to add even more layers and make the chorus even fuller, but the answer here lies in the horizontal arrangement.
Most K-pop choruses are structured into an A chorus and a B chorus, with the B chorus often, though not always, being the most energetic part of the arrangement. Therefore, we opted to keep some of the elements away in the A chorus and then bring them in for the B chorus for another increase in energy.
This can also be great for top lining, as it allows the top line to shine in the A chorus, while the instrumental can take the spotlight in the B chorus.
Once again, transitions matter here too. We used our kick and snare to make a drum fill, which moves us from the A chorus into the B chorus.
Once again, we also cut out the bass and the other drums for the duration of the fill.
And here we are at the highest point of our track.
In the B chorus, we add yet another final layer for our chords. This time, we focused on the highest of high frequencies for an extra boost of energy. Also pay attention to the rhythm that the synth plays.
As we are sure you have concluded by now, layering is an incredibly powerful technique. So let's take an even deeper look by considering what role each individual layer plays.
The first layer is still our core sound. It sits fairly in the middle and is a single, attack-focused, stabby sound.
Our second layer focuses more on the mid-high frequencies and, unlike the first one, plays a rhythmic pattern which develops over time.
Our third layer adds space, character and airiness. It is slightly widened, so it sits in a different space to the first two layers.
Our fourth and final layer adds the highest frequencies for maximum energy and is both a rhythmic and a swelling sound at the same time.
Considering what part each element plays is vital for vertical arrangement and will also make mixing a lot easier. Keep in mind which frequencies each element covers, where each layer sits in terms of space, what type of sound they are they more of a swelling sound or more attacky, and how each layer interacts with the others. For example, when our fourth layer reaches its peak in volume, our first and third layer more or less done playing their part.
But we introduce one more key element here too.
Adding melodies to the B chorus is not a must and often requires good communication between the top line and the producer. Sometimes, top liners will find it easier to come up with a top line around an instrumental melody, but other times they can struggle. There are of course ways to maximize the former case, and we'll explain these very soon. However, you can always explore two different versions at the end, one with the melody and one without, and let the top liner decide.
As you can see, our melody follows a fairly standard pattern of A-A-A-B, and mostly plays the notes of the chords in an ascending pattern. This is intentional as we wanted to give the top line more space and not be distracting.
Once again, we're utilizing three layers.
A bell layer for the initial punch and presence,
a vocal chop-like sound, which is fairly wide and has less attack.
and a stabby synth brassy sound with a particular swell to it.
Together they sound like this.
And just like that, we have the major parts of our arrangement done. Of course, we are barely scratching the surface as second verses and bridges have their own intricacies. So do let us know if you would be interested in a video about those in the future.
Oh, and we haven't forgotten, the track we created in this series will be the core part of our very first community top-line challenge. So join us on Discord as the challenge shall commence very soon.
A huge thank you to our Ko-fi supporters for keeping this channel going in 2025 too. And whether you join our Ko-fi, our Discord community, or simply subscribe to our channel, we appreciate all of you. We cannot wait to share even more content and experiences with you all.